So we've talked a lot about the different natural resources that we have. We've talked a little bit about some of the protections that we have in place to prevent those. So when we're talking about renewable sources, we have fishing limits, we have hunting limits. When thinking about waste, we have regulations of how to treat that waste to protect the environment and ultimately protect humans. But what else is in place? What things in general? And a lot of these you guys actually already know, but might not have known all the details about them. So if you look in the United States, the U.S. government owns a lot of land. When you think about landowners, we usually think about people, but the government actually holds a lot of land and manages that land. And depending on what that land is, will depend on how it's managed. It could be 100% protected, where nothing can happen on that land. It could be, hey, we're going to monitor it, we're going to make sure you're not screwing it up, but you can still do things, and everything in between. So if you look here, most of the federal land is in the West Coast. A lot of this came with a whole bunch of different initiatives as we started moving out west and realizing how amazing those ecosystems were and kind of learning from the problems we had in the east of how we can really decimate an ecosystem. So the federal government owns a lot of that land. Now granted, a lot of that land no one cares about. For example, Nevada is really just a desert. But the point being is that the U.S. government has recognized the need to protect land. And it'll protect it in many different ways. And that's kind of what we'll explore today. So one way the federal government protects our land is through the National Park Service. And more than likely you have been to a national park before, but maybe you didn't realize it. So this is the symbol that they use, and you've probably seen it. And here's actually an example of a national park, looking at Assateague Island here in Maryland. So if a place is a national park, it is kept in pristine condition. And what I mean by that is that people cannot hunt, people cannot fish, people cannot chop down trees, people cannot take things. They do not allow anything to happen to their environments. Even the people who work for the National Park Service, they actually cannot do too much to those ecosystems. They could create and maintain trails, but other than that, they are pretty much off limits with those ecosystems as well. Really, the main goal of the National Park Service, by keeping things 100% pristine, is to educate people. To say, hey, here's these really awesome wonders that we, have in the United States. Let's keep them in this condition. And hopefully to inspire people to want to take better care of our environment. As I mentioned before, they might do a little bit of work, so thinking about trails, because again, they want to get people interacting with that environment as much as possible to really encourage more education and more inspiration. Now you may have looked at Assateague Island and thought, well, Assateague is not a national park. You're right, it's not. However, it is part of the national park system. The National Park Service isn't just national parks, like Yellowstone or Shenandoah. What National Park Service is it actually oversees a lot of things. So for example, national seashores, which is what Assateague Island is. National monuments, so you think down in Washington, D.C. All of those monuments are actually regulated by the National Park Service. Next time you're in D.C., actually look for this logo. You will see it on different signs around the different monuments. National battlefields, which we have quite a few here in Maryland, and then also national parkways, such as the Blue Ridge Parkway. So again, national parks aren't just parks, it's a couple of different things, and again, 100% pristine. Cannot alter that environment. So this is one category. Another category, which we have quite a few here in Maryland, is the National Wildlife Refuge System. And that's what this blue sign is, which you may have seen, especially if you're driving on the road right near a refuge. The National Refuge System is maintained by the Fish and Wildlife Service, which you're probably more familiar with. Most people have heard of them because they do a lot with different plants and animals in the United States. They're a little bit more relaxed. It's not 100% pristine like our national parks are. Instead, there's a little bit of management. They do allow hunting and fishing, but it's very, very regulated. It's not like, all right, go hunt. What they're trying to do is just maintain the populations that exist within this refuge system. However, they don't allow resource extraction. So essentially you can't ruin or alter those habitats because they are trying to attract wildlife and provide a place for wildlife to be safe from unregulated hunting or from just random people. Related to that, I'm going to skip that one in a moment, going to maintain environment. Because they're trying to attract wildlife, because they're trying to make essentially pristine environments for wildlife, they do maintenance of the environment. For example, they will pull invasive species. They will try to get rid of invasive species that exist. If there is a downed tree that is, ruining water flow, they will remove that. They will change the environment as necessary for the organisms that they're trying to attract there. And they're not trying to attract just any organism. They're trying to attract organisms that have historically gone through that path or have landed there before or have lived there before, but might have been pushed out due to human encroachment. So these natural areas kind of allow a kind of safe space for organisms. Now you may think, well, but there's hunting and fishing. But it's not of all species. It's mostly the species that there's an overabundance of them in these national wildlife refuge systems. And their overabundance could actually be affecting other organisms. Now to go back to this bullet point, you can go to a wildlife refuge. It's not somewhere you can't visit. Because they want people to go there. They want to educate people about the wildlife and how they benefit us. They want to inspire you to be a steward, to pass on that education and knowledge to other people. So they kind of have a similar mission to the National Park Service where they want to educate people, but they're doing a little bit more management because I would honestly say their number one goal is wildlife and then kind of humans after that. So this picture is from Blackwater Wildlife Refuge. So this is if you go out east a little bit more, but a huge wetland ecosystem that's protected under this system. Another example is the Forest Service. The Forest Service is running our state forests. Although it is a federal government level, it's managed at the state level. This, of the three different ones we'll talk about, this is probably the most general one and the one that allows the most human interaction with. So here they allow all sorts of things. They allow hunting, they allow fishing, just like the wildlife refuges, but they also allow resource extraction. For example, you can go cut down trees there. I do want to emphasize that it is regulated. It is the Forest Service themselves saying, hey, Joe's Loggers, you're allowed to go here and you can cut down trees of this size, for example. So it is regulated. They're not just like selling off the land to make money. They also will do mineral extraction there. So if there was, I don't know, a really good iron deposit or copper or even coal, depending on where it exists in that state forest and depending on the means in which to get those minerals, they'll allow that as well. But they are still trying to maintain that environment. Similar to the wildlife refuge system, one way they can maintain those environments is by handling invasive species. They will also, down logs and things like that, they'll clear out. They'll even do things like prescribed burns. If they realize, hey, we haven't had a wildfire in a long time and there's a lot of brush and leaves that could burn, let's go ahead and burn it. Pretty much to avoid a catastrophe where you have this huge wildfire that would affect both the environment but also humans that are living around in that area. They also maintain recreation. They are not a huge education type place. Typically in a state forest, you're not going to find a visitor center or a nature center, but they usually do make some sort of trails. Maybe not as built up as a wildlife refuge or a national park, but they do kind of facilitate it a little bit. Think of the Forest Service as more of, hey, we have these forests, we want to manage them to make sure they're not all getting chopped down, but we're also not marketing them, so to speak. So still an incredibly important system, just it's not as built around human interaction and human enjoyment like our national parks and wildlife refuges. And then one last organization I want to talk about is actually jumping ecosystems. Everything we've talked about so far is our land ecosystems, but NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, as you can tell by the name, oceanic, is going to look at our aquatic ecosystems, of which we have tons in the United States. Not thinking about just our coastlines, but our rivers, our Great Lakes, our bays, they're going to be managing those areas. Specifically, what NOAA has done is they have set up Marine Protected Areas, or MPAs for short. MPAs are highlighted here in this map, which are in blue. These are protected areas that have varying levels of protection. Some of these areas have 100% protection, meaning there is no boats that can go through there. There's no fishing that can go through there. Depending on the area, more than likely no people are even allowed to go there, whether they're scuba diving or snorkeling. Most of our marine protected areas, about 3%, are 100% protected. So most of them aren't to that extreme. Most of them have some sort of management protection. So NOAA is handling fishing permits. Yes, you want to go fishing in the Chesapeake Bay? Okay, you need to get a permit through us, and we'll let you know how much you can take of each different type of species. Or, oh, there's a lot of boat traffic here. All right, we need to limit it to 100 boats a day due to all the manatees in this area, or what have you. So it's NOAA that's regulating the aquatic systems, and typically more of the marine. So think saltwater. Mississippi River, NOAA's not really watching. They're more of the coastal, including Chesapeake Bay, and also looking at the Great Lakes. Great Lakes are involved in that as well. So as I mentioned before, they're going to handle fishing permits. NOAA is also a huge research center. So they're doing targeted research on different systems within our marine areas. For example, they do tons of research in the Chesapeake Bay. They're the ones leading the efforts in oyster restoration, for example. They're also looking a lot at coral reefs. Both here in Maryland, we do have coral reefs. They're not as pretty, they're a lot deeper, and you probably can't really see them based on how our water is. But they are looking at those corals. So they're doing a lot of research. Most of these other U.S. state forests, national park system, wildlife refuge, there's definitely biologists that work there. But usually their main goals is just maintaining that environment, whereas NOAA is looking to how do we best maintain that environment. So kind of different goals of these organizations. So as we talk about these resources and things we can and cannot do, just keep in mind the government is doing actually quite a bit. Our national parks are kind of world renowned. When people come to the United States, they want to go to a national park. It's, I wouldn't say unique to the United States, but it's a system that is a lot more developed in the United States versus other areas of the world. So we are doing things, and more than likely you have participated in that. So I encourage you, if your family and you want to go on a trip, go to a national park, go to a wildlife refuge, and help support those missions.